Coming up, it's officially Brooklyn Nets basketball in the 2024-25 season. We talk about high-level season predictions and then get down into the nitty-gritty, taking on the Hawks tonight. We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, oh, baby, the anticipation. Doesn't matter where the win totals are. Doesn't matter what the expectations are. Anticipation for Brooklyn Nets basketball kicking off Wednesday night against the Hawks.
We made it. Preseason, off-season over.
Raise the banner, baby.
The offseason, which started about as early as you can get for any basketball team, and then continued on to the whole year, the whole summer. Now the fall. We made it. It's opening night. The Nets rebuild has begun. Nets fans rejoiced in the fact that Mikal Bridges couldn't hit a shot to save his life to start the game again in the opening night. The Knicks Nets fans have not been that happy since the clean sweep, I said. But now we get actually real NBA basketball, ton to discuss. Even for a tanking season, we have a lot that we can really look at and kind of dive into over the course of this, including sort of like how we think some of these things on a high and low level end up shaking out for Brooklyn over the course of the year.
You better believe it. We'll talk about the Hawks matchup, obviously, later tonight. Nick Claxton is going to be back in that game, so finally he'll get on the floor. Wasn't able to make his debut during the preseason for the Brooklyn Nets, so that same old problem of what do you do with him and Ben Simmons? We'll find out under Jordi Fernandez. First, though, oh, baby, the big picture. The season overall and some critical over-under predictions. We had some fans pretty upset that yesterday we did not get to our predictions as we had originally had planned. But here's a prediction. You got to watch every single day. That's how you don't miss out on things like this. Kicking it off with the over-under win total, Doug. This one was at 19.5 to start. Dropped a little bit to 18.5, but now we're spiking back up on FanDuel to 19.5 over-under. Are you taking the over or under on this?
No, I've been on their team under on this all off-season, and I will stick with it. I think that this team is not good, obviously, and only can trend worse over the course of the season. There's really no way they're going to improve on what's already probably the most talent deficient roster, except for probably the Wizards in the league. And they only look to trade some guys who are real NBA players. And so I just don't see it, even with a coaching upgrade in Jordi Fernandez, even with, maybe some, a Ben Simmons healthy season. I'm just between the motivation and the talent, which is low on both. I'm taking the under here.
I'm going to go ahead and take the over. Why? Because I'm bullish on maybe 20 wins. I don't have to take the over and think.
19.5 is insanely low. I'm with you on that part of it.
I do think, it's just this world where, well, I don't know, maybe certain teams are resting on a back-to-back and you grab a couple, or maybe more specifically at the start of this year when we talk about the veterans all still being on this roster, maybe they grab a couple of games early, and then on the back half, when we talk about these young guys getting more run, hey, all you need to do is scrape together 5 or 6 wins and you hit that over. So while in totality, I'm excited for the season, I understand what the assignment is, and this team isn't going to win a lot of basketball games, but 19.5 is just so freaking low. I loved it when it was 18.5. We should have recorded this yesterday. Would have given me better chances, but I'll take the over there. The second big over under then we have, of course.
Can I just say one more very quick thing on this?
Of course.
I will say one thing is that we've had people say to us, well, last year they won 32 games and all they lost was Mikal Bridges, who wasn't good, right? I've heard this many times over the course of the year. Two major things with that, because I know people are going to come into the comments and say some version of that. Yeah. One, they were trying their butt off all season until like the very, very end. And they
desperately trying to make the play-in tournament. Yeah.
Desperately trying to make the play-in tournament. And they got to 32 games. Two, as bad as Bridges is, Bridges would be at worst the second best player on this team. Right? If they did it right now. Right. So, and Dinwiddie kind of was sneaky important for them early in the season. And so if you just look at the on-off stuff,
it's a good reminder. Yeah.
They just kind of have talent degraded here like the drop off from Bridges to like drop off to Bridges to somebody else is significant. So anyway, I know people are going to come and be like, well, they won 32, 19 and a half. They're worse. They're worse for sure. And last year they tried so hard and they're not going to try this year yet. Sorry to just, I know we're going to roll into these other ones.
No. And actually, you know what? And we'll move quickly on some of the other over-unders. But on that point, just remember too that like I always wonder, like, what's the weight here? The talent in terms of over/under 19 and a half wins. Okay, that's weighted on the players you have on this roster and your ability to win games. Then agenda. Like if there was a world where let's say that the pure ceiling of this team is 30 wins, like let's just say, but the agenda of the organization, that's going to cost you 8 to 10 wins this season. Like the organization going to make sure that they avoid those. So even if it was, hey, apples for apples, like I said, drop Mikal Bridges back into this, run the same season a year ago and just change not the players, but the agenda of the team and the organization. And they would have only won 25 games a year ago, probably, right? Because so you're always pushing, you're always trying. You would have sat guys down sooner. You would have maybe made some trades a year ago that you wouldn't be making necessarily if you were in a competitive season. So that's the other big part here, like the discrepancy of what this organization wants to accomplish this year. That is as big an impact as the talent or lack of talent or young talent that they have on this roster currently as well.
Oh yeah. So anyway, I knew someone would come in with that. I heard some version of that many times this offseason, and I get it to some degree, but you just have to factor in these two things. And by the way, as bad as Bridges was for the Nets relative to expectation, again, he would still be like he's still a good player. And so they just didn't replace him with another good player. They replaced him with like Jalen Wilson, who's probably going to be fine, right? Like these are the things that are going to come up.
No, so I just him with Ben Simmons. What's the problem? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. So like, I just want to get out in front of that almost for sure comment that we were going to hear. Let's hit some of these other over-unders.
You better believe it, man. We'll get into this and it'll probably bleed over into our second segment. Trades over under. I'm setting the number at 2.5 because I was trying to thread the needle here on what would be intriguing as you approach that deadline. Over under set at 2.5 for the season. We obviously know Dorian Finney-Smith. Talk about Schroeder. We talk about maybe Shake Milton being in that mix, and you can obviously add in, Ben Simmons to the conversation. Though that's not going to be a realistic thing that we think happens, along with Cam Johnson as well. So there's 5 legitimate potential guys that could go, 4 really if we take Simmons out of the equation.
I'm going to 2.5 trades. I'm gonna say under. I don't know. What do you think? I was gonna say under for sure, but then I don't know. When you started adding all these guys, this is a good podcast. When you started adding all these guys in, I kind of got a little, I got a little gun shy on that. I'll say under because I just still think that the problems that they've had trading some of these guys are going to be still like there, right? And so I'm going to say under. And I do not feel amazing about it. I want to hear your answer here in a second because I think that after I waffled for a while and kind of gave a non-answer, in a good segment, I do want to hear your answer. We'll get into that here in just 1 second. First, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, over at NFL, NBA season. NBA season is rolling. NFL's in the middle of it. You can get a big return over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Maybe you're in the middle of the game stuff. Maybe you're just having a gut feeling because you're watching the Nets. You're like, hey, they're running bad on threes, and they're going to keep running bad on threes because I'm going to take the Hawks. So you want to go the other way and say that, hey, the Nets are going to come back in this thing and cover the spread. It's all there for you over on FanDuel. Nets come in at +6.5 here to start the season against going into Atlanta with the over/under. It's set at I think it was 224.5, which is 222.5 right there. If you think it's going to be an up and down game, maybe you think the Nets are going to hang. Hit that +6.5 over on FanDuel. You get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 real money bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with your first $5 real money bet at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, season kickoff, Atlanta Hawks, we're ready to go. Nets are ready to go. Tank mode. We can't wait for it. But as we were just talking about number of trades over under 2.5, Doug took the under. Very bullish on it, by the way. Came in hot and has nothing but confidence around it. So it is to your point, though, because in my mind, I say, okay, Dorian Finney-Smith, he's going to be out the door. And I actually think if I was going to get to the over, I'd be more bullish that Shake Milton and Dennis Schroeder are the other 2 guys before I start talking about Cameron Johnson being a part of that. I know there's been a little bit of buzz and he has the really big preseason performance there. And we all know that teams can dream on him, but the money, the compensation, all of that. So I'm going to take the over because I think by the time we get to the deadline, we will be talking about probably already having made one trade and then seeing if they're really pushing the envelope for getting rid of a couple of these other guys. And maybe record plays more of a factor in this than it would in years past, where you say, okay, we won those few games. We do need to clear the deck here and get the young guys in and make sure that our tank is on track. Yeah, I'm taking the over, and I think Cam Johnson might be the critical decision that has to get made here to get across the line if it's not going to be Shake Milton playing well and offering value to another team. And by the way, to undercut myself, it's still hard, even in labeling those players as available for trade, because even in a tank season, you still need some guys to handle the ball. You still need some guys to shoot. So there's going to be that requirement of a Keon Johnson to step up enough over the first half of the season to think you can move on from some of these other guys.
Yeah, so maybe 2.5 is low. I do think they're going to be motivated. I just get so worried. We talked about this so many times, and maybe we can.
And three trades is a lot, though, too, right? Like trading 3 players, no matter what the condition of the team, it's just a lot to accomplish that in the NBA landscape. It's not like it's just the Nets selling; other teams are making moves in this process as well.
And I'll tell you what's hard to see now is that the teams that are going to be motivated to like add to their team or subtract from their team, it's so hard to know now. Like, the season just plays out. Yeah. Guys get injured. You just don't know. New teams open up. New teams you think are going to be candidates fade away. And this is one of those really like sort of moving goalpost thing over the whole course of the year. Although I will say, if I'm some of these teams and I watched Boston last night, I'm like, maybe next year's our year. Because maybe we don't need to sell it all to try to compete with this Boston team who absolutely just dismantled the Knicks last night without Kristaps Porzingis. So,
oh my God,
I don't know if we're looking at like a sort of like peak Warriors kind of thing here. Probably not. Definitely not that. But man, the Celtics are good. So I know I do think the Nets are the motivate sort of to the win total piece. The motivation matters a lot too. If the Nets are motivated to move these guys kind of like at the deadline for anything, then 2.5 probably is low, right? Because at that point you're just like, hey, it just doesn't make sense to keep them on the team. Anything is better. We love the assets. Let's just pile, and we'll go from there. I did see an interesting thing where someone mentioned, and I forget who it was, and I apologize, but it was like, oh, what if you start attaching Cam Thomas to Cam Johnson's contract, right, to a team? And I was like, oh, I don't think that's likely by any chance, but I never really thought about that. And then the algebra or the calculus changes a little bit for me, but I really don't think that's likely. But I just think that was at least interesting.
Yes, 100%, because low cost, and we already talked about our last episode discussing no extension for Thomas and what it looks like to maybe have another team pay him as opposed to the Brooklyn Nets. That actually does tie into, though, one of our other big over-under of the season. Over-under 4.5 core Brooklyn Nets players at the end of this year. So we're talking about guys that next season, when you get to the draft and you get Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey, and you have that following year and another big draft class and all the picks, over 4.5 players that will be a part of this organization in a meaningful way going forward. So we think about Nicholas Claxton. We think about Cam Thomas. We think about Jalen Wilson. Do we think about, obviously, Noah Clowney, but do we include Trendon Watford? Do you include a Zaire Williams, right? So there's a lot of players on this roster that have a chance to cement their role in it. Over under 4.5. Had to set it high enough where it's actually a difficult decision on somebody.
I think it's under. I think that because, one, I just think the Nets have been all these guys are like sort of nice players, but I think we're forgetting like sort of what happens when you draft high in the draft or get lots of draft picks is that you just have this talent influx, and the Nets have never had it. So it's easy to get wrapped up in the guys that sort of are around. And look, Clowney's good. He's for sure one of them. Excuse me. I do think Jalen Wilson is a real player. So I think that's probably part of it. You want to say Claxton's part of it. I think those three is kind of it that I would feel really, really solid saying. Everyone else, you get a Flag, you get an Ace, you get one of the Boozer guys, like you get, AJ Dibinasta. I know I butchered that name. But you get one of these guys, you're just gonna see that these other guys the Nets have just aren't it. Right. And I think that's kind of more. So I'll take the under. I'll take the under on that because I think we're just gonna see 2 years from now, this team's just gonna look like, I would say, 80% different than it looks now.
I will also take the under on that too. And it's funny between the episode the other day talking about it, you mentioned, well, what if you attach Cam Thomas to one of these trades? Cam Thomas, who we like, and who's an incredible scorer, almost to your point about, well, if you draft a player who comes in and he's an elite scorer, well, now you have a new elite scorer. Like right now, sometimes it's what are we totally devoid of? the one guy that can do that, well, you always want to make sure that you make him a part of your future plans until you dump in 4 players next year and 3 players the year after. And all of a sudden you look at your roster and it feels a bit different. I'd like to be just on a positive side note. I'd like to be surprised by one other player, whether that's Trendon Watford, right? Zaire Williams has had a nice preseason, but it doesn't mean that we feel like he's by any stretch set in stone to be a part of this roster going forward. And then you think about even like guys like Keon Johnson. These are long shots to have an opportunity like that, but it'll be fun to watch them because I think everyone's stocked in terms of the young players. Forget about the veterans. All the young player stock, that's going to be the watch over the course of this season. Who's rising, who's falling, who's cementing themselves, because it will inform the decisions that the Nets make. And man, I tell you what, we've said it before and we've talked about him a lot. Cam Thomas is going to be a fascinating watch throughout the course of this season, depending on how the organization approaches moving pieces as you get to the deadline and thinking about next off season.
Yeah. And again, I would feel better about the over on that if I felt like I had a sense of what the Nets plan, like how the Nets felt about any of their guys. But we talked, like you said, we talked about it yesterday. We just don't even know, even with Cam Thomas. It's just like, it's so unclear. And all these guys
are about Claxton too, as well, even in spite of the contract. Like, do we have any conviction that next trade deadline, a move might get made with Nicholas Claxton with 2.5 years remaining on his 4-year deal? Like,
I'll tell you right now, let's say Hartenstein's injury stays in Thunder. You don't in Oklahoma for the Thunder. You don't think like they might come calling for Claxton here as a defensive center that can play with Chet, like with all these draft picks and stuff? Like, I don't know. I don't think that's likely, obviously, but I'm just saying these are the situations that come up. It's like, oh, he's hurt to start the season. They need that guy. That is a championship level team if they have like these certain pieces. They might come call. So I think you make a good point that like he could be enticing to the right situation too.
Yeah, so I think originally I had this at 3.5, and I probably should have kept it there because 4.5, then when you start having the conversation, feels like it gets a little too bullish. Last one that we'll get to here before we turn our attention over to our expectations for tonight for the Hawks game. We'll be back in tomorrow morning breaking this bad boy down for everybody. Is just from a, and this one feels so low hanging in terms of the hierarchy of what matters this season. But we talk so much about Cam Thomas being a 20-plus point scorer. It's more just an interesting question. Over under 3.5 double-digit scores for the Brooklyn Nets this year. How many guys on this roster? I didn't say 20-point scores, obviously. I was originally going to do over 1.5 20-point scores. Then I realized that was incredibly foolish of me. Let's just go with guys that can score double digits. Over 3.5. Do you look at this roster and see guys that can consistently do that? And I think one of the big factors is minute shares, because maybe it just holds everybody a little bit lower than they would be if you gave a single player 30, 32 minutes as opposed to 25.
Yeah, this is another insane one because that's such a low number. You said 3.5.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost have to say over just because of the math, but like but it is one of these things where it's really hard to see who. I mean, Cam obviously for sure, right? But then, and it's so funny too. If Simmons plays a lot of minutes, you almost have to say over because he takes so few shots that someone else has to take the shots. Like,
I love how a bullish nature of Ben Simmons playing a lot of games in minutes relates to somebody else scoring a lot of points, which I know.
Well, right, because he's not going to do it, but the usage has to go somewhere, right? And so, man, I mean, so last year, if you just think about it, so Bridges was at 19, Schroeder was at 15, Cam 22, Dinwiddie at 12. Claxton at 11.8, and the Cam Johnson at 13.4. So I'll say over just because the math. But I will say though, it's a little hard. It has to be over because of the math, but it's hard to think about who it's going to be. Like I could see Clowney getting there by the end of the season, right? Like he plays more. Like there are guys like Jalen Wilson. If he spikes it to like 27 minutes a game, he's there, right? So there's guys. I'll take the over. I was probably too long to come to that conclusion, but it's funny that it's not a snap call, and you have to kind of look like squint at the roster to see how it gets done.
Well, and because you said You go back, it's Thomas, it's Schroeder, it's Johnson, it's Claxton. There are 4 guys on the roster last year that are on the roster this year that scored double-digit in points. So the number is right there to just barely hit the over, but you took away some other pieces, whether or not Dinwiddie's a perfect player, whether or not McHalebury's a perfect player. The offense has changed. I think Clowney is the good note there. And then obviously, what's the development track of Jalen Wilson? So the number feels right just because it illustrates what could be a difficult start to the season here for the Brooklyn Nets. But I know 3 and I know it's insane. It's an insane number, but it'll be fun if, by the way, the reason why we get to the over is because Noah Clowney and Jalen Wilson by the end of the year average double digits in scoring. Hey, then that's a win on the season. Even if it ends up being that Nick Claxton only scores 9.9 points on average this year. Great. Give me the 2 guys that we think could be a part of that key core to go ahead and carry over for this roster. Coming up here in a second, guys. Predictions over. Season ahead. Don't worry. Check all those boxes. Make all your bets. We get into the Hawks matchup. Where do we think the minutes are going to go? What is Jordy going to do with Simmons and Claxton? We'll get into it all to close things out in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends over at Gametime. Look, there's nothing better than going to a live event. Whether it's an NBA game, you're heading over there to Barclays. Maybe you're going to an NHL game. Nothing better than actually
the
NHL.
Devils last night, baby.
Yeah, there you go. So it's just, the hockey experience is just so much different live than it is on the television screen. That's where Gametime picks can step in. Whether it's the event, whether it's the concert, whether it's the comedy show, the theater, whatever it is, Gametime Picks has you covered. You just download the app. You're going to get curated deals. You're going to find the best seats. You're going to see exactly what you're going to see when you sit down. They have super deals. They have lowest price guaranteed. They have event cancellation. Gametime is going to help you sort. Even if you're like, oh, you need some ideas, Gametime Picks is going to help you sort there. Maybe you just want to go over to the Nets starting Sunday. Bucks at Nets starting at $42. Nuggets, a little Jokic action at Nets starting from $34 next week. That's all there for you over on Gametime. Right now, you're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, as we tie a bow on this Locked On Nets episode, the season opener, the Brooklyn Nets journey to 20 wins, so I hit the over, begins tonight against the Atlanta Hawks on the road. The Brooklyn Nets, just from a matchup predictor standpoint, they got a 38.6% chance to knock this one out of the park and get that first win of the year. We mentioned at the top, it will be Nicholas Claxton's return. We thought that was going to be the case all along, which probably then does make the biggest question or the most interesting thing to watch right out of the gate for Jordy Fernandez is how do you manage the rotations? What is the starting lineup going to look like? Where does Simmons and Claxton fit into this? And how concerned will this coaching staff be about that as opposed to years past where they seem to ceremoniously love to put these guys on the floor together and think it would somehow work out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Simmons and Claxton are going to start together. I just think that's how they're going to do it not because it's a good basketball decision, but because it's ego and money decision and, veterans and all this other stuff. And we don't know for sure. And I think DFS is supposed to play, but as of right now, yeah. I would guess that's the starting lineup. I think they started Simmons all through the preseason. He did what he did, looked better at times, looked the same at times. We already know that the fit doesn't work. So I don't think we're going to learn anything new there. But as we've said many times, is that there's other considerations here, and it's not just about perfect basketball fits. And I think that in this, they're going to let Simmons start. They're going to play who they see as their 5 best players, at least out of the gate, and they're going to conclude Simmons in that. And the fact that he makes all the money is going to help with that decision too, help in quotes. But I think that's what it's going to be. And hopefully there's, quick pulls on this to actually get maybe some functional rotations that work, like, bringing in Clowney and playing him with Simmons, or, just, bringing in Wilson and play him with Claxton or whatever. I mean, Clowney can play with Claxton too, but yeah, so I think that's going to be it, but I don't think it makes sense. The numbers don't back it up, but there's other things besides numbers I think the Nets are probably considering here.
Yeah. And while I'm a big proponent of pushing for doing the right thing or doing the fits that make sense and getting that sorted out as soon as possible, I have come around more to your perspective on not only the money and just the length of the season and the agenda of the year. It's not going to cause me to throw my hands up in disgust if I turn around and say, okay, so they started with Simmons and Claxton together. And then with the first break, Simmons came out, right? And you brought in Noah Clowney. So then, by the way, if you want to get the fan base, frustrated but also excited, that's how you do it. You make Clowney the first guy off the bench. You take out Ben Simmons. You put him on the court with Claxton. We didn't get to see that in preseason. We got a great sample at the end of last year. They got everyone excited. Great. So give us that. So you can annoy us with 2 non-shooters on the floor for a stretch, but then give us the young kid.
And then, by the way, then Claxton comes out and Simmons maybe comes back in, and now you now you play these rotations like a little bit closer to 2024, 2025 basketball. Not like not that starting lineup. But that's just is what it is. It's so funny because like the way to win in the NBA, it's in some ways it's the NBA is kind of solved here. It's like spam threes with good wing players like the Celtics did last night, and you just can't be beat. And the Nets are going to be like, hey, Simmons plus Claxton plus whatever. Like, let's see what happens. It's just like 2024. We just know that math doesn't work, but whatever.
From a distance, I like watching, by the way, in terms of a matchup standpoint, when we talked about this, listen, Cam Thomas looked better in the preseason, more effort, more focus on the defensive end. You got Trae Young coming in. Now you have some weight behind you. You should be able to try to speed bump him at times. That'll be fun to watch. Jalen Johnson obviously popped off last year. He has most improved odds that I really liked. Doug, you put out your picks for all the key category winners this season. Maybe we'll cover that at the end of the week. I like Jalen Johnson in that category. Anybody else from a matchup standpoint that you want to see? Let's just say one of the young guys. When the young guys come in here, who are you most excited to watch in this season opener, whether it's matchup or just performance independent?
Yeah, I think that a couple things that we'll keep an eye out tonight is that one, how the Hawks so I'll get to the young guy 1 second. How the Hawks attack Cam Thomas, like if they're interested in blitzing him. They did it last year. They were the first team to do it last year. If I remember, they were the first team to really, and it caused up real problems. They might just not care because they might just be like, hey, whatever, you can take all the shots. We're not worried about anybody else. I'm not really sure. They had Dyson Daniels there, a better point of attack defender that could give Cam Thomas trouble. Like they replaced DeJounte Murray with Dyson Daniels. I think Daniels is going to start over Bogue. But so I like keep an eye on that. I doubt the Hawks are too worried about it. Game should be up and down the court. I do want to say, I'm most interested to see Jalen Wilson to see if he can like create his own shot. If Jalen Wilson is more of not just a 3-and-D guy and has like a little stuff off the bounce, I think that it's slightly interesting for this year, but that's the main one. Cause I already kind of think I know what we're getting with Clowney. Although one more thing with Clowney, one thing we saw in the last preseason game is that he was attacking closeouts more and actually putting the ball on the floor and getting to the basket. I thought that was pretty interesting. He did it like 3 times and like, ooh, if that's like part of his game, that's really something. And so I think those 2 things I'm going to look out for the most.
Yeah, it was funny too, because you mentioned when you say that about Jalen Wilson, it's maybe he'll have a little bit of the off the bounce stuff that we thought Cam Johnson would have when he came over, but then ultimately didn't have. So can you be a little bit more than what you have in a 3-and-D wing? That'll be fun. And of course, Noah Clowney, right? Always going to be fun to watch him as well. Last thing we get out the door on, Doug. Let's do this all year long, buddy. You said it's the Brooklyn Nets. They're getting 6.5 points on the road. Who are you taking? And we'll work the spread all year long. Let's work the spread, and we'll see who comes out on top.
Hawks minus 6.5. I'm going to be hard pressed to bet the Nets here. So I'm going to go Hawks minus 6.5. And I don't feel, by the way, always wrong about this stuff too. So good on Nets fan. Like, yeah, Nets fans should be happy about this. Like all this, the amount of stuff I get wrong with this is just unbelievable. But yeah, I would say Hawks minus 6.5.
Personal message to the Nets fans. It's you and me versus Doug and the world. I'll take the points. I'm not calling for them to win, but I'll take the 6.5. So this will be the first one. We'll run our records all year long and see who comes out on top. It's the start of the season, man. That's the most exciting part here. And there's enough young players, Clowney and Wilson, even Claxton, right? Like there's enough here for me, Cam Thomas, to get excited about to watch on a night-to-night basis. And let's get our first taste of it. Jordy Fernandez at the helm. A lot of different things to watch for here against Atlanta. Let's get the season underway. Looking forward to it. We're back tomorrow morning with the post-game coverage.
All right, look, go over to WeGotNets.com. Grab that season preview that we got 4 stories, 4 days, totally free. Just put your email in. That's it. Don't want your name. Don't want any other information. Just throw your email in. Everyone's got an email address. Throw it in there. You get 4 stories, 4 days. The season, we could be winning games into the season. This stuff's going to be sort of evergreen along that too. So don't worry if you miss it right away. But WeGotNets.com.
Even the greatest once was a beginner. Don't be afraid to take that first step. Why that, my friends, is Muhammad Ali.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.